In this video, I sit down with Mark Adderley and have a catch up about all things coaching. We talk about the importance of coaching in this new world, delivering virtually, the matching process, and some of the challenges that have come up in this new world. Hi Mark, it's great to have you along.
Hi Alistair, brilliant to be here. Thanks for asking me.
It'd be great, Mark, if you could give us a bit of background to yourself and some of the work that you do with Clarke.
I've been working with Clarke now for a couple of years. A number of really exciting things I've been doing with organisations, mainly around leadership development and coaching. Before that, I spent about 15 years in a number of organisations, either as HR director, change director, transformation director, chief exec, and gradually got a greater appreciation for coaching, and then got my own qualification about 8-9 years ago.
Coaching during COVID in this new world, there's a lot of challenges with virtual coaching. I'd love to hear some of your experiences and challenges for you as a coach in the virtual coaching world and how you've overcome some of those.
Well, I'm not sure I've overcome all of them, but I can certainly tell you a bit about the challenges that a number of coaches have been facing. I guess kind of two big ones really. One is the technology, and the other is the relationship. And I think I'd kind of put it into those two areas. In terms of the relationship, the most important thing about working with a coach is having a sense of trust, of mutual understanding, and that means you really need to get to know each other quite well. And so much of the messages we give people are given through body language. Not just kind of, how you're holding your head and how you're holding your hand, but actually, how you're sitting, how close you're sitting to somebody, leaning in, leaning back, all that kind of stuff. And it's much harder to get those kind of messages through a virtual world than a real world. So developing that relationship becomes more difficult. I guess what that's meant for me is a number of clients who I had previously met and had a good relationship with, already developed a sense of trust and mutual respect. We're kind of okay because you kind of move into a virtual world, and you can still you've got that kind of foundation to build on. But with new clients, you have to work doubly hard as a coach to really build that relationship as that foundation before you can move on and start to work with people. So the relationship thing is particularly tricky. The other thing is just the technology, and I work with a number of people in completely different organizations, and organizations have different tech that they want to use. With some organizations we're using technology like Hulu, with other organizations we're using Zoom, others we're using Teams, we're using Cisco WebEx. Some have had to resort to audio conference because actually the video just fails for some reason. Others have bandwidth issues, and so actually they end up having to say, well, we can only have a video for half an hour to turn off and then go to audio. So the tech actually can be quite tricky. I love it; it's great. And in terms of kind of bigger events and facilitating big events, some of the technology that you can use is brilliant. In terms of logistics, arranging meetings, not having to travel to see people, it is fabulous. But the tech can be quite a kind of tricky thing to get your head around when you're initially starting up, particularly working, as I say, with different people in different organisations.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And before lockdown, would you have been an advocate of virtual coaching? Were you much more a face-to-face coach before all of this?
It's really interesting. I was always a face-to-face coach, so I always said I had to meet clients face-to-face. And at any of my kind of coaching arrangements, whether it was a kind of set of 6, set of 10, I would always put in the contract, yeah, of course we can meet virtually. But I'd always wanted to say at least 1 in 2 should be face-to-face, because that was always, I guess, the way I'd worked. I don't think that's necessarily true now. I think it's harder work as a coach to build that rapport, as I was saying, but in terms of enabling coaches to work internationally, any time of the day, any time zone, and any location, it's actually facilitated our working much more broadly, I think, than I had expected. And everybody is now becoming used to the tech. So, you go back 6 months, if you said, well, we want to have a coaching session virtually, people say, oh, what do you mean? I'm not quite sure about that. What am I going to look like on camera? How's that going to work? But now everybody's doing it. so I think it's becoming much more a kind of natural part of what people do day in, day out. So coaching using tech is much less of a big deal than it was, I guess 6-12 months ago.
Now you're getting used to using all these different platforms, jumping around, solving all the issues that might come up with the technologies as it happens. Most of them. What are some of the challenges that you found delivering virtually from the coachee side, from the client side?
I think there's a couple of similar things. So again, there's the tech, there's building relationships, but there's one big thing I think that I've found when I've been coaching people virtually, and that is their inability to get away from where they're working. So normally when I coach people, I'll try and take them out of their normal working environment just to get them to think a bit differently. And I'll do stuff like, use chairs and say, go and sit in a different chair, pretend you're somebody different, imagine what it's like to be spoken to in a particular way, or how would you tackle that particular issue, or actually just walk around the block. Sometimes walking coaching, walking between meetings, that kind of thing can be a really helpful and productive way to work. So that's no longer an option. And for people who are working at home in particular, it's much harder for them to get away from what they see of as the kind of new work environment, because they're just using their tech in the same way. And so I think there's that stuff. The other is, I think the challenges people have faced have been quite different during lockdown. And I guess I've been working with people as they went into lockdown, as they've been kind of working through lockdown, and also as some of them are now going back to something completely different post-lockdown. And I was thinking about kind of 3 L's is the way I tend to think about it. So when people were moving into a different virtual world, I was trying to get them to think, what kind of legacy are you trying to leave? Because so many people had thought, well, I'm a different kind of leader here, I need to work in a very different way. But actually, whatever you do there will be remembered when you get back into the future world. So just getting people to think about, how did they want to be remembered after this time? And you'll hear that being used a fair bit, I think, across the world. Actually, in 50 years' time, people will say, what were you doing during lockdown, or the COVID lockdown? And I guess using that as a kind of way to get people to think about the legacy has been really important. The second thing, when people are going back into a different world, is getting to think about the learning, because they will all have done different things in a very different way during lockdown. They'll have stopped doing some things, whether it was weekly meetings, daily meetings, all that kind of stuff will now be done in a very different way. So thinking about, what are they now doing that they weren't doing before, what were they doing before that they're no longer doing now, just getting people to think that through, because so much has just been done from a very operational perspective. Roll up your sleeves, get stuck in, do something different. Whereas actually stopping people or giving people the opportunity to stop and think about what is it they're learning from that different world has been quite important. And then the third L for me has been the long term, in that there have been so many discontinuities in the world around markets being fundamentally changed, the way distribution has fundamentally changed, the way customers have fundamentally changed, behaviors of staff have fundamentally changed. The long term of any business is going to be very, very different, and therefore getting people to think about that has been kind of a big theme for me. So the things I've been getting people to think about have been quite different to the kind of things we would have been thinking about before.
Wow, I really like those 3 L's: long term, learning, legacy. I think that's a really nice box to kind of put these things into, and it is really important, I think, to refer back to those, especially during this time. That's amazing. So we've spoken about building relationships in a virtual world and how you've kind of managed that with existing relationships. I'd love to talk about the initial session, that first chemistry session you might have, Mark, and how on earth do you build rapport on day one when you've never met them before and their first interaction is through the screen?
Yeah. It's a real challenge, actually, and I think even the way you expressed it there, I would change a little bit. Sometimes in the kind of face-to-face world, what we think of as an initial meeting almost splits into 2 different bits. A chemistry bit, which is, do we get on? Are we going to be able to trust each other? Are we going to work together? You know, when we say confidential, do we think we really mean confidential? That kind of stuff is just about, you know, do you fit with someone? Then the other is the kind of contracting bit and making sure you get all the kind of the right understanding of what is coaching, how we're going to work together, how much challenge will there be, how many coaching sessions are we planning for, you know, what's the cost, all that kind of stuff, because all those kind of things are up for grabs in a very different way, I think, in the virtual world. What I would say is it's not just about the initial meeting. And actually in the virtual world, I used to think about the HRD would fix up a meeting and I'd come along and meet the individual who I was going to be potentially coaching. And then you just see how you got on. And I'd actually have a very set process that I would run through. And it was a bit about, tell me a bit about you, what are your challenges, I'll tell you a bit about me, how I work. And then I kind of had a very fixed, I called it an ABC of contracting, making sure that people understood it was their ability, their agenda, a bit about boundaries, making sure you understood the boundaries, and a bit about the importance of confidentiality. So I had a kind of almost quite a set process that I tended to use. And in the virtual world, two things. One, there's more of a preamble before the initial meeting. So it's not just about the meeting, it's about an email exchange that becomes part of the chemistry meeting. So just arranging time, these are the kind of things you might want to talk about. How have you been today? Just asking questions in a very gentle way in an email becomes part of that chemistry meeting. So it's no longer just a video call for an hour. It's actually a kind of a longer journey of discovery, of getting to know each other through those kind of various bits and pieces of email. And secondly, I've become less, I guess fixated is probably the word I'd use, on making sure I get through my agenda. And it's much more about how can I help this client in this meeting today, virtually, with whatever issue that they kind of want to bring to the table. So I guess I've personally become far more client focused. Now, I guess you could argue maybe I should have been doing that in the kind of face-to-face world, but I did have this kind of very fixed thing on must cover this. But now I can always cover those by email. You can pick up on that kind of stuff, but the important thing is much more about can you actually help the client fix whatever it is they want to bring to you? Can you actually help the client to improve in this particular way? Can you actually help the client to think through the problems that they have in a different way? So I tend to use that initial meeting more as actually almost a working session. Let's just talk about a real issue. How are we going to tackle it? How can I help you to work on this? And that's become my kind of way of working on around the chemistry meeting, because in that way you build a bit of understanding about how you work together. So you do some of the kind of contracting bit, but you also spend far more time thinking about how can we build a relationship and then use it to actually be beneficial to the client. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting how your kind of style and structure has changed to the virtual world, and how you can use other tools to pick up on stuff that you've not necessarily spoken about in the session itself. And Mark, the big question is, what is the future of coaching going to look like? Are we going to see an all virtual approach, or as soon as it's safe to do so, are we going to go back to face? What does the future look like in Mark's world for coaching?
Okay, so let me just look at my crystal ball here. So, I just don't know. I think we've found that there has been a big shift. And I think the fact that everybody is now, or most people, some people still don't like doing virtual coaching, but most people have shifted to virtual coaching, and I think it's pretty successful. I think you can get just as good outcomes. I think you can have just a bigger impact on somebody, on a situation, on an organisation, as you could do in the past. However, I think certainly from a coach's perspective, you've improved the logistics significantly, because you don't have to travel fundamentally. So I can work in India this morning, I can work in America this afternoon, time zones permitting, and that kind of stuff means that the market for the people who I can coach is much bigger than it used to be, but also the market for coaches for an organization is much bigger than it used to be. So I think that will I guess keep accelerating down the technology and the virtual route for coaching. And I think the other thing that we've seen is that a lot more companies are opening the door to coaching, and a lot more individuals are looking seriously at coaching as an option. You know, fundamentally in terms of leadership development, we've seen a decimation, I guess, of a lot of the mass sheep dip type leadership development programs that we used to have before. And actually, I think some of that's a good thing, because there is something about bespoking development for individuals that becomes much more important. And we've seen potentially through technology, certainly with the decrease in travel cost and increasing internationalization, coaching becoming more accessible to people kind of worldwide. So you've got people who are losing this kind of leadership development piece, people who still want to develop, but want to get individual development, and you're getting a kind of more global market, I think, being created for coaches. So I can see it becoming a bigger market, even more driven by tech in the next few years. I think there will always be some people who will appreciate face-to-face, and I think in-company coaching as well, I think is something that will take off. Many companies actually outsource a lot of their coaching, but I think we'll see development of in-company coaches, and we'll see, I think, a lot of a kind of almost sessions moving from a very fixed model of I'll give you 6 sessions to I'll be around for you, almost a retainer basis. So I'll give you a call when I've got an issue. I'll give you a call when I think you can help me with something. And I think we might see some of that at the more senior level as well.
Wow, yeah, that's really insightful view, Mark. And it's amazing because so many other parts of the world is shrinking. There's deglobalization, and it feels like this is just the beginning, the opening of the funnel to the coaching world right now.
Okay.
Access to the market is incredible. So, Mark, the matching process between coachee and coach is obviously very important. There's all sorts of coaching styles, and people prefer to coach in different ways. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what coachees should be looking for when picking or reviewing coaches.
Interesting question. And I guess there's 2 different aspects here, because there's obviously the organizational perspective, and then there's also the individual's perspective. And I think, having been an HR director when I used to appoint organizations or panels of coaches or whatever it was, what I tended to look for was an organization that had a wide range of skills and experiences, a wide range of coaches that they could call upon, a wide range of people that could work at different levels, and I guess there's a small number of organizations that can do that. Taylor Clarke is obviously one of them. Then they've got a great breadth of experience and people with a wide variety of industry and level expertise. But then there's the individual matching process, and quite often an organization will say to somebody who wants to be coached, here's 2 or 3 people. Now, each one of those people will be very different. I think most of us, when we were trained, will have learned 3, 4, 5 different coaching models. But actually, it's not just about what you do, it's also about how you do it. So it's not just the steps that you take people through, it's also about how you do it. A lot of that's about style, about experience. It's about whether you can show real empathy. Occasionally there's a gender question. Some people would rather be coached by a particular gender or not. Sometimes there's a geography question, sometimes there's an industry question. Do you understand my industry? Now, I would always argue that to be a good coach, you don't need to have worked in the sector, the industry, the role, but you need to have a breadth of experience that allows you to ask really incisive, deep and challenging questions, because that's what coaching is all about in the end, being able to ask incisive, deep and challenging questions that enable somebody to get to a better place. So as a coachee, for somebody who's been coached, having a range of people you can choose from is really important, and finding the right coach for me, it largely depends on what it is that you're looking for. If you're really looking for challenge, then you want to find somebody who is going to challenge you. If you're really looking for somebody who you can just chat to about issues, then somebody who shows really good empathy. Everyone should have good listening skills, but you want outstanding listening skills and the ability to empathize and possibly sympathize. So every coach is different, every coachee is different, and it's about getting that match, I guess, as good as you can, that is quite often done by an organisation, can be done by technology, but in the end, you need to make sure it's done by the individual.
Yeah, and I guess realizing that, or being able to identify that this coach might not be for me, and
Brilliant.
being comfortable to move
Yeah,
on to somebody else or ask for
yeah,
another coach.
yeah. And actually, as a coach, almost that's a very successful initial meeting. If you have a chemistry meeting with somebody and the decision is no, you're not for me, that's actually a really good outcome, because that wouldn't have worked. One, that wouldn't have worked anyway. Two, you're helping the individual work out what kind of coach they actually want, which is moving them in the right direction. So you've helped them by enabling them to do that. That might not always feel that positive, but actually, my personal view is it's helping them move in a step in the right direction.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's interesting because in a world where so much has changed, the fundamentals like this are still very, very important. The matching process is still essential. Essential,
Yeah,
it needs to be done right.
yeah. And in the end, it's we're all people, and I think there is a lot of talk about how much artificial intelligence will kind of automate coaching and make an automated coach available. I think to a certain extent, some things can be done that will enable that to happen, but there's also something about the interpersonal relationship and rapport that enables you to understand how many levels you can go down, how many how many layers of the onion you can peel off in a question. Sometimes it's only one, sometimes it's five, and understanding how sensitive the individual is, and therefore how deep you can target your question, how challenging you can be. You can only really tell if you're actually if you've got a good relationship with somebody, you understand them, there's that sense of trust and real empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. And I know you wrote a blog piece about the different layers, using the onion as the example. And I think that's the real benefit of having an actual person to speak to, is they can drop on their experience about, oh, okay, I dealt with somebody like this before, and I know that I don't want to go too deep on this, or we're going to move on to another challenge. I think it's really important, and that's the real value of having an actual person opposed to
Yeah,
an AI.
I think you're right. While I work across sectors, probably half of my coaching clients are in the higher education sector. Now, yes, I was an HR director in the higher education sector, so I've got a number of contacts there. But actually, and many of them are academics, they're senior academics who I'm coaching, and I'm certainly not an academic. But at least understanding the industry, the sector, the importance of students, having been in that sector for a while, enables me to understand the kind of challenges that they're going through. So again, I haven't done the job that they've done before, but I understand enough about the challenges that they face that means I can ask the right kind of question.
Mark, as always, it's been so incredible to speak to you and hear your insights about the world of coaching. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Pleasure. It's been great to talk to you, Alasdair. Take care.